Okay, and a little bit from you. Just tell us.
Testing, testing. I always thought when you push this button, a coughing noise comes out, and a sneeze button,
Yeah, that's
and a
right.
hiccup
I got a
button,
little sampler in there.
fart button.
Lorna, the sampler? Are we rolling? Thank you. Okay. Well, I'm glad you're here. Of course, you got an album coming out called No World Order,
Hmm.
right? It's going to be the first, is that right? The first interactive project that the American public has ever seen. Is that right?
It'll be the first. It'll be the first album that comes out simultaneously in interactive formats.
Uh-huh.
The first format will be CDI, which is interactive format that requires a special player. It's a consumer player. It's not a computer. Although we could do computer versions of them, that requires a lot of hardware. But this will be for the consumer market. Philips will be publishing it, and they also happen to make the hardware. Other people make the hardware as well, but Philips is the primary hardware developer. And the device has only just been available a year or less, about a year, I think, in the U.S. Not a lot of people are aware of it yet. So part of the idea, I think, from Philips' standpoint, is to make people aware of it and to make a connection with music industry, which essentially is CDs, which have taken over the music industry, are also a Philips development. In other words, they have the whole range of laser disc formats, and some of them are non-interactive and some of them are interactive. It's just that up until now, most people have not taken advantage of the interactive end of the spectrum, and I'm moving in that direction now.
Okay. How does this work? Someone has to buy an interactive CD player. And
Yes.
then what comes up on the screen? Is it a video? Is it...
This is less connected to the to television than it is to records. A lot of people, when they start developing for interactive formats, they want to take advantage of all the things it can do, which includes showing the equivalent of video on the screen, sometimes not full screen, maybe in a little box on the screen, but video and pictures and other visual things that I'm not as concerned with, because I'm trying to evolve the musical part of it. Essentially, take something that everyone's familiar with, the CD, and make that an interactive musical experience without necessarily bringing in all of the other capabilities of the machine, the video and things like that. There will be things on the screen, something to allow you to tell the device what kind of performance you want, and set up other control parameters, and also tell it what you like on the screen, although it won't be anything like a video. It'll do some things on the screen just to keep the screen from burning out, if nothing else. But in terms of people's listening habits, once they've got the thing in and started up, they should be able to do what they do when they listen to any record, which is dance around the room or do the dishes or close their eyes and visualize their own accompaniment to the music.
Is it something that they program in? Is it like, I think I read that you can program 8 bars of music any way you want in different sequences? Or?
Well, it's conceptually, it's a lot of people have tried to either oversimplify it or overcomplexify it, but it's basically there are 3 things you can have the device do. One is it can imitate a non-interactive performance. In other words, you can put the interactive CD in there and turn it on, and it'll sound just like the non-interactive CD that you buy in a record store. Then you'll additionally have the options to specify certain aspects or flavors about the music that you would prefer to hear. Like you can pick from a number of song sequences. You can choose a range of tempos. Say that if you're having a party and you want the music to be all up tempo, you can tell it not to play anything that's slow, or you can tell it to play only the happy parts, or range some particular range of mood or something like that, and also tell it to sort of be more flexible with the musical infrastructure in some ways, and the end result is that by setting up a series of parameters, and actually not very many, 5 or 6 different elements, the system that can then go off and invent a new record for you, and do this more or less infinitely. In other words, if you give it some certain parameters and start it up, it'll go through and continue to play until you turn it off, inventing this new record the whole time, this continuous stream of musical ideas.
Okay.
Then.
Oh, sorry. Hold on. No, I didn't hear that. Yeah. Can you say you wanted to just have an instrumental version of a song?
You can control sort of the dynamic level of the music, and go through. Not only can you hear the instrumental without the vocals, if you want to do a little karaoke sing along, but there are levels throughout where you can eliminate various combinations of instruments, so that if you've always had the complaint that you can't hear what the singer is singing, you can specify that you want the entire mix sort of thinned out, and there'll be fewer instruments, and voice will be more prominent. So there are a lot of things, a lot of different combinations of things that you can specify for it to do, and it'll do it more or less without you touching it after that.
I see.
There's one more mode.
Yeah, no, tell.
And that is that you can connect some of these things up to a controller that comes with the device. It has a little sort of joystick controller. It's a cross between a remote control for television and like a video game controller, and you can connect the joystick up to various of these parameters and sort of in real time change them, so you can navigate through the musical space by moving the joystick around. So there are essentially 3 modes. There's one where it sounds just like a regular CD. There's one where it invents new combinations all the time. And then there's a mode where you can actually interactively in real time control the choices that the system makes.
And during this time, what's on the screen? Just instructions. What do you want to do with this, or is there a still photo of something? Or
there, as I say, there'll be a couple of options of essentially not necessarily interactive screen displays. I suppose one mode will be just to turn everything off, blank the screen out completely. Then there might be a mode where it's where it just maybe shows the album cover on the screen. There may be a mode where it indicates to some degree how you're navigating through musical space. But it won't be it won't be like a music video or a slideshow or anything like that. There are technical reasons for this. One is that since most interactive products are marginally interactive, which means that they stop interacting every once in a while to go get information from the disk or something like that. And the idea of this is that it never stops. It's aesthetically unacceptable for the device to stop and say, wait a minute, I'm going to look for this piece of music somewhere. It all has to play relatively seamlessly, so it places great demand on the resources of the machine. And if you try and exceed that by getting pictures off the disk as well, then then it's going to lapse back into this thing of like click and wait, click and wait. And for some interactive title developers, that's acceptable, but I'm an artist, and performance is my, is the essence of what I do. So this click and wait thing is just unacceptable. It has to be a continuous, seamless performance. And if that requires making less demands on the resources of the machine in order to accomplish that, then that's essentially what we're prepared to do.
Okay, and you're looking at this, maybe right now it's got a couple of limitations to it, but you're trying to get this to be like the wave of the future, the way people listen to music in the future.
The important thing is the concept behind it, not necessarily any one particular realization. The biggest hump to get over from a musician standpoint is philosophical. It's not technical. First thing you have to resign yourself to is giving up some of your agenda to the audience. Artists are very anal and like to have things be exactly a certain way often, particularly musicians. They labor over sounds that 99.99% of the people don't even notice, and they want the records to sound exactly a certain way. And if they had the option, they'd come into your house and tune up your stereo, so that you would hear it exactly the way they wanted you to hear it. So the first thing you have to give up is that kind of possessiveness about the experience, and realize that this is going to change music into something that's more like sculpture, where people can walk around it and look at it from all different sides and stop in one place and consider it, or go away and look at another painting and come back and look at it more. Or as the light changes during the day, the shadows on the object change and it looks completely different. So other artists are used to this. They accept the idea that the work sort of adapts itself to the audience and to the situation. But musicians are traditionally not like that. The other philosophical area that you have to resolve is the basic tenets of interactivity and what they mean, how they affect art in general, and what's the overall thing trying to be conveyed. Any art movement has its basic philosophical tenets, like Dadaism was a reaction to people taking themselves too seriously, or various other art movements that affect not just, let's say, not just painting but music. Where there's a cross-pollination of art forms. There's usually some philosophy behind it. Something that overarches all the different instances, the specific works that are done under that particular banner. And interactive art has its own philosophical building blocks that need to be understood if you're going to be comfortable, first of all, working in interactive art, and then effective in working in interactive art. Specifically, there is I guess maybe three principal things that an artist has to keep in mind, or that you're trying to convey to the audience. The first one is impermanence. That the idea that things don't change is an illusion, and that we have to confront the fact that all things change. Change is an inherent principle of the universe. And old style music that got recorded on discs, which 100 years ago didn't really exist. Before that, the only time you heard music was in a performance. And so the performance was assumed to be different every time. Then when we created records, the performance was the same every time. We captured one and listened to it over and over again. But that is basically an illusory concept, because musicians can never recapture that performance again. So change is some or impermanence and change is a basic philosophical element. Also, choice, the idea that you have life is a series of choices, and even though you sort of ignore them or don't think about the choices that you've made, it doesn't change the fact that there are constant choices for you to make to change to change reality into the reality you want it to be. And so the art is designed to enhance people's awareness of choice. That's the idea of interactivity. You get to a point where you have a decision to make, and you can either make the choice or you can front load your decisions in some cases. In other words, you don't necessarily make them, it's not like driving a car necessarily, but in the case of specifying what your tastes are in a musical performance, at some point you have the option to make a choice. And the third concept is context, is out of the world of ideas, constantly changing ideas, the choices that you make ultimately result in a context or an enclosure around a certain number of ideas. And the size of that idea space may be relatively constant, but new ideas come in and old ideas go out. And so you have to have a solid context to survive that process, to survive the fact that it's constantly going to mutate into new things. And it's kind of like a genetic experiment. Some combinations of DNA may seem robust at some point, and then suddenly they just die out. And that's the end of that context. So choosing your context carefully is also a characteristic philosophical element of interactive art.
That kind of, or I'm sorry, were you finished?
No, those are the basic philosophical things that you have to keep in mind.
That was going to lead me kind of into the next idea. The concept or the context for this album, No World Order, seems kind of reactionary. Maybe you could talk about what your context was. Was it anti-politics, anti-Republican politics, pro activity?
Well, it's basically just a play on words to start with. That has to do with this whole interactive thing and the idea that destiny is preconceived, and that or that the record will come out the same way every time. That human beings actually do control the course of events in the earth when everyone will more or less concede that most of humanity is reactionary, and most human institutions are reactionary. Or reactive. I don't mean reactionariness. I mean reactive. Something happens to them and then they adjust, rather than pre-visualizing the circumstance that you want and then having the world sort of conform to that pre-visualization, which is the way anything that gets really accomplished in human terms works. It's just that we do it so rarely. So in that sense, No World Order is really my way of pointing up the fact that first of all, this is an interactive experience, so there is not necessarily any order to it. I think even the non-interactive versions reflect that, because the songs get broken up into fragments and quoted and requoted throughout the record. Also, there is my reaction to the concept that some government would suppose, or some coalition of governments would suppose, having done such an awful job so far to bring the world under their sort of control or their vision. And I suppose the overriding, the continuing message that's in my music, the basic philosophical thing that's in my music, is that all human accomplishment and all human misery and all of the perceptions that you have about life are totally individual, and that because life is a fearful experience, we make alliances with people in order to protect ourselves. But if we really faced the truth and got down to it, you would say that, no matter how close I feel to these other people because of that particular alliance that I've made with them, there's a point at which none of them know what I'm thinking about or agree with me, or, there's a point in which you're always on your own. And the whole concept of, by some policy, going out and changing the world, to me, has always been fallacious. It gets down to a very basic thing that I believe, and that I think I have empirically proven in the case of my own children, which is that other human beings, for the most part, do not pay that much attention to what you say. They pay attention. They watch you, and if you are, to coin a phrase, the Word made flesh, then they are convinced. But if all you do is talk, then talk is easy. It's very easy to figure out what the right thing to say is. It's very hard to live up to your own pronouncements. And that's why it always gets down to an individual thing. People always pay lip service to the way they want the world to be, but most people cannot live in that world. Most people are not high-minded enough to live in the world they visualize. And so my whole philosophy is, if you want the world to be different, there's only one place you can go to make it different, and that's inside yourself. And that's my essential, my politics, my religion, my philosophy. And any idea of a new world order that doesn't place responsibility for that new world directly on individual people is really just, is more politics as usual.
I'm glad you said that. I was going to bring that up. You said in your last, what was I watching? Oh, the Sessions for Second Wind. Mm-hmm. You brought up the title of the song, Change Myself, mm-hmm. is a reaction to, not trying to change the world, but, looking for change within yourself. And so I'm glad you reiterated that philosophy. In terms of the songs on the album, I got Eric sent me the package, mm-hmm. and I got to pick up my favorites before the rest of America.
Long before the rest of America.
My favorite is Love Thing. Mm-hmm. I love the bass. Mm-hmm. that kind of pulsating heartbeat, right. Kind of feel, and of course your traditional harmonies are employed in that song.
Yeah, I like to sing.
Yeah. Also, a new direction you went in was to use rap, and I was interested in why you chose that. Is it just a way of you? Is it a kind of need you had to get your point across and to just sermonize, or was it just a new instrument for you to try out, a new tool?
I think it's probably more the latter. Anyone who's familiar with my recorded history is not surprised by anything that I do, whether it's to dredge up some old influence or to mutate some new influence. I think for a long time, I had no interest in rap as an art form. First of all, I didn't think it was that new. They tried to make it new. I mean, the new part was the way that it had been cheapened. It wasn't, because I remember rap. I remember the poets of East Harlem, in the late 60s and things like that, where it was poetry over sort of like a traditional ethnic rhythm track or something like that, but it's essentially amounted to the same thing. They weren't singing; they were speaking and preaching with a heavy rhythmic background to it. And then, of course, the whole toasting thing, Jamaican music, and which is where contemporary rap more or less came from. And I didn't think it was that new. I thought the new part was that it had been sort of mostly, when it first came out, it had mostly become this really sort of I'm not exactly sure how to put it, but there are musical forms that come along that are designed for opportunists, that are designed for people whose commitment is not very great overall and would like to make a killing. And it attracted an awful lot of people, and the problem I had with it initially was that for the most part the subject matter did not resonate with me. The size of someone's sexual organ, or how bad they were, or things like that. No, subject matter just seemed, personal crowing, just doesn't seem to me to last for a long time. And so I didn't really have any interest in it until certain other people started working in the form, or until serious people got into it, like Public Enemy and NWA and people like that started actually talking about things besides, their sexual prowess or how fast they could talk, or, just that personal crowing thing. When they got into not only the more thoroughly considered lyrical ideas, but also really interesting things in terms of cutting and pasting music together in order to make a soundtrack, and then the whole sort of hit and run philosophy that evolved out of that. The having all of your sound and your whole production be in a very compact package that you could set up and do a show really quick and then load it all back in the truck and be off to the next place without all of this, like build the stage and all of the other stuff, So I think as it evolved, as the art form evolved, or as it evolved into an art form, it was previously, like, let's say, a folk art, started to produce people with enough seriousness and skill to give it some longevity. Then I started to take interest in it and see if there was a way that I could, without literally copying it, find some room for my ideas in it. And when I started doing it, it turned out to be a lot of fun, because it gives you a certain freedom you don't have when you're singing. There are some things that you can say that sound stupid when you sing them. So gave me a lot more lyrical freedom, and it's a lot of fun sort of playing with the polyrhythmic aspect of it, and the idea of, moving in this gray area between a rhythmic delivery and a very conversational delivery. And from that standpoint, I'm not sure how fully I'll exploit it, but I found it to be actually a very useful thing in terms of getting some more subtle or elaborate ideas across that would be difficult in a strictly musical context.
And then not only do you use that tool on the album, but you do use the harmonies that you used on, a cappella, are still there. In fact, you use a sample from Lost Horizon. And I guess the direction I want to go with this next question stems from something I read in Rolling Stone. Cameron Crowe, who directed Singles, in one of his diary entries put that if he could come close to the emotional perfection of Todd Rundgren's Hermit of Mink Hollow, he'd be happy with the film.
Huh.
So that was interesting to me. I mean, how do you perceive where you are now with this? Do you perceive it as you're reaching emotional perfection, or you're designing these harmonies as...
Well, there's a qualitative difference between the records that I make with other musicians and the ones I make by myself. And I think that's it reinforces that illusion of perfection when I do the records myself, because there's a kind of an understanding about what's going on that you don't get when you're playing with other musicians. That's part of the point of playing with other musicians, is to have them mix their responses in with yours, and you get this sort of unique soup of ideas and responses. When I do the records all by myself, and Herman and Mikala was one of those, and this one is one of those, there's a full understanding in all the musicians, because they're all me, of exactly what kind of impression I'm trying to put across. And that creates this sort of, this much more of a sort of a white light, I suppose, than a chromatic effect, and that for some people is more representative of.
So speaking of these people, your fans, I was interested in... I called Murph Summers at the Nexus, and was asking her some things about the newsletter and about the fans. And I wanted to see what you perceived was your connection with these people. What's the catharsis? What is it? Age? Is it just generational outlook on life? Or?
I don't think it's generational, although there is certainly a generational aspect to my career, because it was considered to have peaked sometime in the 70s, even though I continue to make records to this day. It's just that the kind of music that I've made or continue to make has not been popular on the radio since then. In that sense, I have a core audience who's followed me for many years, but there are still people who just discover it out of the blue and seem to have the same reaction. And I think that it goes back again to this particular philosophical thing, that this thread that goes through almost all the music I've ever made, which is this concept of self-awareness. And that for people who are actively into this self-exploration thing, they find the music to be helpful to them. To people, I suppose, who are not, they may find the music to be fey or self-involved, or they'd much rather hear some heavy metal screamer talking about the world domination, I suppose. But I don't think that's the only reason, but I think it's a principal reason why people like the music. I think it's also why I have a different relationship with my audience than a lot of other people do. One, as you mentioned, is the sort of longevity that they have. It's a personal relationship that developed over a long time, and a lot of records and live performances and things like that. So it would be the same as any other artist, really core audience. And beyond that, I think that they have a relationship with each other that might be different than some other fan organizations or something like that, because they have an understanding of what the rules are in my music, which is this, the whole thing about individual responsibility, individual self-awareness. Don't take yourself too seriously. Don't take the world too seriously. Think about God whenever you get a chance. Things like this, that they understand about each other. That helps them to get along, I guess, in a way, and they help each other a lot. They exchange information a lot, and essentially, and they run the fanzine. In other words, it's not like Murph sort of supervises it, but most of what goes into it comes from all of the people who read it. And I don't know whether that's any different than any other fanzine, but I just know that that's the way it works.
Mm-hmm. Okay, before I go to my last question, Rod, did you have any someone filling? Yeah? Okay, good. I guess my last question is what's next?
Well, we're talking about the album as if it's, out there, and so the album doesn't actually come out until June. The album and the CDI will be out simultaneously. Between now and then, I've got, I'm pretty busy between now and then. I'm on my way to Woodstock right now. I'm going to be producing Paul Schaefer's album, which will be the world's most dangerous party album. And when I'm done that, I'm back to the West Coast. I'll be preparing to go on the road, doing a little bit of exploration, finishing up the development on the CDI product. I have a gallery showing in Japan in April, which will feature work that principally was done in the digital video studio that I operate.
The video toaster or the Newtopia software?
Yes, Newtopia Digital Video, which is a partnership between me and Newtek, who make the video toaster. And what we do there essentially is computer pictures, or pictures that go through a computer. I mean, they may not look like computer pictures. It may look like regular video, but everything, the whole process essentially is computer intensive. We do a lot of this virtual reality stuff, and that'll be taking up a lot of time as well, doing videos for the record. So between now and June, I'll be pretty busy, I think, and then after June, I'll still be busy.
Good. I just want to ask about the virtual reality. Is that the three-dimensional sound kind of?
Holographic sound. Holographic sound is an element in some virtual reality systems. The problem with the term virtual reality is it just became too hot too fast, and people throw it around to mean all different kinds of things. And I've always understood it to mean telepresence, to mean being physically in one place but sensorily in another place. And as far as virtual reality is concerned, I think that's really describes a state in which you don't necessarily need devices to get there. They're helpful usually, but for instance, if you're playing a record and you close your eyes and suddenly you are in the Garden of Eden, then that's virtual reality at work. It's virtual reality is very much tied into people's need to have all of their ideas physically reaffirmed. So you have to actually, it's not good enough to imagine it anymore. You have to actually see it, or feel it or smell it. And so that's essentially what virtual reality is to me. In terms of practical application, I look at it as being telepresence, which is like you're in one place, but you could be running a robot on the moon, or or a little tiny device that's in somebody's bloodstream, digging out a clot of cholesterol or something. So that to me is the practical application of it. Everything else beyond that, I think, has always been there.
Good. How about you? Did you have anything else you wanted to get across?
No, I'm fine.
To the old listeners?
No.
Okay? Okay? Somebody else looking for the studio?
Great.
Oh, good.